Hello and welcome to another episode of Fractional Impact. Today we're speaking to Terence Davy, a SaaS operator who has spent over a decade building and scaling post-sales organizations inside education technology. We'll be going into the most common drivers of churn in scaling SaaS companies, how to design post-sales teams that support both retention and expansion, what strong fractional leadership looks like inside high-growth organizations, and more. Terence, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, thanks for having me here. As you said, my name is Terence Davy. I'm a fractional executive and executive coach, largely in the SaaS space.
Awesome. And we're joined as well by Gianna Maliari. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Gianna.
Thanks, Stuart. I'm part of the Fractional Clients team. I help out with sales and all things client delivery, and I'm really excited to be getting into everything today with Terence.
Awesome. So, Terence, so that the listeners can get a better sense of who you are and what you've done, tell us about everything you've been doing over the past few years and how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start by saying what you mentioned. I have spent over a decade building post-sales functions, and a lot of that experience was in a very early stage startup that grew into a unicorn valuation and then went through a ton of acquisitions. And I had the privilege of being a leader in that space throughout around 10 years. And that experience is so unique. And so few people have the privilege to be in a space like that of continued hyper growth and success that I wanted to share it more broadly. And so that's what I've dedicated myself to, helping leaders in companies that are trying to make a real impact do it, be more successful, lead from a place of purpose and intention, and actually hit the targets they're trying to hit.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let me kind of dive straight into the deep end, because I know that one of the biggest outcomes that you generate for your clients is better retention of their users and their customers. How do you go about that when you go into a new company and they're struggling with retention? What are the first areas you look at? How do you actually diagnose what the issue might be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to start by saying I'm assuming that this is an organization that hasn't built out any kind of cohesive life cycle. And so they don't have any type of metrics that point to a problem area. And
Yeah.
so in that kind of state, the first place that I'm going to look is around the renewal event, both what's happening, how are the teams selling, like, do they have strong skills, but also when is it happening? A super common thing that I see is that renewals are treated as an afterthought. And so sellers might be, or customer success managers might be engaging a client a couple weeks or a month out from the renewal event. Then they uncover some huge challenge that the client's been having, and it's already too late to make a change. And so just pulling that renewal event up to 4 to 6 months before expiration can have a massive impact. I've seen it create a double-digit change in retention immediately for organizations that are missing this. So that's the first place that I would look. Since customer success is quite a bit more popular now, I hope folks are spending a bit more time with clients than the last 30 days before expansion. So the next place I would look is how clients are starting their relationship with the company. In general, the churn rates are highest in the first year of someone purchasing a product. And so if you want to go and get really clear on how good of a job are we doing at understanding the value that we promised when we sold this tool, and how good and how quickly are we realizing the value that we promised. And so digging into that area and seeking to improve time to value and understanding what clients are looking for is the next area that I would look.
Yeah. What's kind of the reason that companies should maybe put more time and effort into customer success? Because if they are, let's say they've got a new round of funding or something like that, why not put that extra money into sales or marketing or product? Why customer success?
Yeah. I'll answer your question directly, but first I want to say it doesn't have to be an either or all the time. If you can zoom out and look at this as a cohesive part of the organization, but to zoom into specifically why customer success, I'm thinking of customer success as defined as the people that are there to ensure that clients realize the value of what they purchased. And in a SaaS space, the better you are at helping clients realize the value, the longer they'll remain clients, the more trust you'll build to sell those services and expand. Uh, and depending on the tool, your customer payback period, the time where you recoup how much money you invested to close deal might be more than a year. And so if you have a leaky bucket, you're not just losing the revenue for that one client, you're also losing everything that you invested to close that client, and you're killing your customer lifetime value as well. And so if you zoom out, uh, the ideal for a SaaS organization is to arrive at a space where their retention numbers, the expansion numbers, and the cross sells that they're closing in their existing client base is the driver of the company value. And so if you're not putting a lot of focus on this, you're really cutting yourself off at the knees on how valuable you can become over time.
Yeah, interesting. Is there what do you think is kind of the best time for a company to bring in someone like yourself, a fractional customer success leader? Is there a funding round? Is there a certain bottleneck? When is the right time to bring in someone like yourself?
Kind of joking, but I'm a little bit serious, is before it feels comfortable too. Which would mean before it becomes a problem. And so you don't want to wait until you're dropping like 30% of your clients off after the first year to bring in a customer success expert. Some like preliminary markers that I would look at is if you have team members that are having to make decisions about whether they support a client or go after a brand new client. If they're having to make those prioritization decisions themselves, it's probably time to separate functions. Because what I see in most organizations is that the renewal falls on the initial seller for a while before they separate out the functions. But yeah, you don't want to have someone choosing between, do I support these folks that have already paid and try to get them to expand and renew, or do I focus on net new business?
Nice. Yeah, I think that's a really specific and useful kind of takeaway that people can have. So when you go into a company, how do you implement systems that drive accountability and autonomy within them?
Yeah, so I've had this experience of building cultures of accountability and autonomy across multiple teams. I know we're largely talking retention, but across success, account management, support, and in a bunch of different scenarios as well, like building a team from the ground up, inheriting teams, or integrating a team after an acquisition. And through all of those experiences, there's really just a few keys that kind of apply everywhere. And the first is getting super clear on priorities and goals. What are the priorities and goals of the organization, and how does this specific team and function contribute to those priorities, and in a measurable way, not some kind of like pie in the sky dreams, but things that we can actually produce in dashboards. Um, and then you give the team members the time and ability to co-create the how, like how do we actually go after these targets, what are the plays that we're going to run, what are some of the experiments we're going to try, uh, and to support that experimentation, you need to have those desired measurable impacts readily available to the team members. You don't want to have to wait for a monthly or quarterly review to understand how you're progressing against target. By that time, it's already too late to change something or try something new. And so, one of the principles that I move forward with in creating accountability and autonomy is team members have real time access to the metrics that matter to them, and they don't have to wait for me to tell them how they're doing. And then to bring all of those pieces together, the last piece is typically a weekly rhythm of what I call an accountability meeting, where it might be a one-on-one, might be a pipeline review, a forecast, But the important piece is that the way that the meeting is presented is that the team members are in charge of coming prepared with what's working, what's not working, how are they doing towards their goal. Right. So really creating ownership over both the outcomes and how they're trying to attack the goal. And that allows the leader to be in a space of having their role be coaching, challenging perspectives, and helping the team member try things that they don't quite have the experience to do. And that's how you create real accountability and autonomy. And you give away the ownership and you give them all of the tools to be successful. And then you're there for guidance and coaching and course correction where necessary.
Yeah.
Is there any point where adding more team members actually just doesn't solve any more problems?
Yeah, I mean, there are points where adding more team members will create more problems. If you're thinking about the role of a leader in creating clarity and coaching and guidance takes a lot of time and bandwidth. And so if you add team members and overload a manager with so many direct reports that they can't really focus on that, you're going to see a decline in impact. And also, if you're just adding team members and increasing your cost to do business without thinking about how can you iterate on processes to be more efficient, um, you're probably missing out on an opportunity for cost savings and doing more with less, which everyone is being asked to do right now.
I know that one of the other big outcomes you like to drive in a company is creating a culture of operational excellence. How do you go about actually making that happen in practice?
Yeah. Well, I'll first say, like, if people don't know, a culture of operational excellence is one that is built on the idea of experimentation, iteration in service of the customer and customer outcomes. And there's a bunch of different factors and foundations that go into operational excellence. I could probably talk about it for the next hour. To avoid doing that, I'll just call out maybe the three things that I think are most important in building a culture of operational excellence. The first is psychological safety, which I know it's a super common term these days, but just for folks who might not know, it's a shared belief in an organization or a team that it's okay to contribute and take risks and make mistakes and challenge the status quo without fear of any kind of punishment or retribution. That's super important for operational excellence because, again, you're iterating in service of driving client outcomes. And what iterating means is you're going to try new things, and not all of them are going to work. I would say most of them probably won't work. If team members don't feel like they can make mistakes, they're not going to try new things, and you're going to get stuck doing the same thing over and over again. So that's psychological safety. The next, which you've already heard me talk about a couple of times, and you'll probably hear a few more times today, is clarity of goals and purpose. And that's across every level. You need to have a very clear understanding as an organization what you're trying to accomplish. And then those goals need to cascade down every level of the organization. So you have like real clear alignment on what we're trying to accomplish. Otherwise, your iteration and experimentation might go in 100 different directions and get you zero results. And the final piece that I'll talk about, again, it's not the last piece of operational excellence, but I think it's the most critical part, is a true customer focus. And what that means is you are prioritizing client outcomes and client feedback over any leader's egoic attachment to being right. Right? So if you think some strategy you're rolling out is going to have a huge impact and it's great, but the clients are saying that it's not, it doesn't matter that you thought it was right. Like, you're wrong. And so you have to be able to release that and prioritize what the client wants.
In that first section, you were talking about the psychological safety and the having an atmosphere where you can put forward ideas, you can make mistakes and stuff like that. Do you find a lot of software companies have too much strictness around processes and stuff that a lot of companies don't have that kind of atmosphere?
Actually, especially with newer organizations, I don't see that too often, where there's too much strictness around processes. I think folks are a little bit more open. In some cases, I think things might be a little bit too laissez-faire, because a piece of psychological safety is having a lot of clarity on what needs to happen and what's expected of folks as well. And so companies, especially a newer SaaS organization, which in my mind, I'm also thinking like younger founders, younger leaders, um, might not be creating the clarity that's necessary to create psychological safety for their teams. I see that more often than people being too rigid.
Yeah. And so when you go into a company and you think, okay, there's not much psychological safety here, and that's what you focus on, and you basically make that how you want it to be, what kind of impacts can founders expect from that?
I'll first say that if you're in an organization that has pretty low psychological safety, the task of creating psychological safety is a long-term one. It's not something that you can just flip a switch and all of a sudden everyone trusts you to not punish them for making mistakes. But if you are committed to that path, which I recommend for any software organization, I'll come back to your question. I want to be really clear on this. I'm talking about psychological safety not because it feels good or because it's nice. Those are great reasons, and I do think it feels good and it's nice. But psychological safety unlocks your ability to innovate and adapt over time. And with how quickly things change in the tech space, always, but especially today, companies that aren't able to adapt and innovate are going to die. Just full stop. And so it's not a nice to have that feels good. Like, this is unlocking your long-term success. And so really committing to this idea of building out psychological safety will give you just that. It gives you the ability to trust your team to adapt and iterate and experiment to find the thing that will work best for the situation that you're in.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you must work pretty closely with obviously not just customer success, but also account management and customer support. How can you make them work together to drive predictable expansion revenue?
Yeah. First, I want to talk about what those separate functions mean to me, because especially looking at an early stage organization, you probably have one person maybe doing all of those roles. So I want to talk about on how I think about them delivering for a client. We've talked about customer success a little bit already. That's turning value promised into value realized and trying to do that as quickly as possible. Account management, I think of as selling into an existing user base, whether that's retention, expansion, or positioning new products. I classify all of those under account management, although especially on the cross-sell piece, that folks might consider that more of an AE role. And then in customer support, what I think about is them solving immediate and urgent client issues and bringing a client from a state of, let's say, being negative or below neutral in their sentiment about the organization back to neutral. And so regardless of the teams that you have and how many folks are covering these responsibilities, I think those are the core things that need to happen. And then thinking about them as a cohesive unit. First and foremost, I hinted at this before, but having a clearly mapped out customer journey that is instrumented to understand, like, where in this journey are we losing clients? Having that instrumented on the back end, but having it kind of invisible to the client, right? When they interact with the organization. I actually saw this in my last organization. We ran a like pretty extensive study to understand our customers' perception of customer experience and support. And they actually saw no differentiation between the different team members at our organization. They called everything support, right? which is the experience you want to have for a client. You want them to go, I need information from you, and I don't want to have to think about who to reach out to. And so to make that practical, it's like figuring out how do we hand off things on the back end in a way that's invisible to the client so they just get what they need. On the like more internal side, or continuing on the internal side, customer support, again, if a client is below neutral in their sentiment, you're probably not going to have a lot of success realizing value or selling anything to them. So they both need to be responsive and solve problems quickly, but they also need to be able to report on trends to CS and account management, but also to product and engineering to solve problems for the full customer base before they impact retention numbers. And then the final thing that I'll say about this is to make all of this click, these separate teams or separate functions have to have shared metrics of success. You can talk all day about wanting to have collaboration and wanting teams to work together. If they're not actually measured and it's not written into roles and responsibilities, and it's not something you talk about all the time, like shared metrics of success, maybe it happens, but you're relying on luck. It's not going to be something you're able to influence as a leader.
Yeah.
On customer support and the customer success versus account management sort of debate, are there any other areas where you see that there's confusion around ownership and sort of which belongs to which function?
Yeah, I'm pausing for a second because the way that I actually think about a business is as a complete holistic system. And so like the roles and responsibility issue kind of happens at every anytime there's a handoff between teams. And so you'll see it in account executives maybe handing off to a customer success manager. Like, did we make a good sell in the sales process? Did we get a really clear understanding of why this person is purchasing and what they need to see to be successful? Because if not, you're making the CSM's job way harder and in some cases impossible. There are also in some organizations, onboarding and implementation are owned by CS. In some organizations, they're a completely separate team. And so you can have some role confusion there. In that, if those roles are combined, you can end up with a team member that's deciding, do I focus on value realized for later stage clients, or should I be putting all of my energy in these clients that we're closing this month? Right? Yeah, and I could go on and on about like pretty much any time there's a handoff in an organization from one team to the next, there's an opportunity for there to be role confusion. And because of that, there's an opportunity to create clear measures of success and clear expectations for how that handoff works.
We've talked quite a bit about systems and handoffs and stuff like that. If I were a founder listening to this and maybe I have someone here and there for account management versus customer support, but everything's a bit all over the place because everything's moving fast. If they were to bring you in and get everything set up properly so that they can actually see their metrics and they know what they need to improve and how long does it actually take them or take you to get to that stage where everything's built out and, you know, things can start actually driving impact from that point?
The timeline can vary, but I'll say that the thing that has the biggest impact on timeline is an organization's willingness to change and actually try new things, and then their willingness to commit resources to building. Because it takes, if you don't already have metrics in place, it takes extensive resources, and that means probably pulling people off of other things that are quote unquote priorities to make it happen. But if those things are true, if people are committed and you have the proper resources, you can see meaningful change on a process level within 3 months, and more cohesive customer lifecycle changes that I can really hand off to someone to own on the order of 6 to 9 months, probably.
Interesting. Yeah, nice. For founders sort of building their first post-sales leadership team, what mistakes do you often see at that point, and how can they be avoided?
Yeah, I've mentioned a couple of these things already, but I think it's important to double down on them. One of the biggest mistakes is just focusing on the renewal event and not thinking about all of the things that happen in the life cycle that lead to a renewal event. You call that like they're just focusing on lagging indicators and not paying attention to leading indicators, aka they have no opportunity to actually do anything to change the result that they're getting. The second that I don't just see in early stage companies, I see this in large organizations and more established organizations as well, is making retention, customer success, and account management focus, but not necessarily an organizational focus. I think that is a huge mistake because CSMs and AMs can only do so much to influence retention. For an example, if you have a super buggy product and folks are having trouble using it, all a CSM can do is report on those trends, but you need product or engineering to actually fix it. And so, not treating it like a company priority creates silos of work. And again, going back to one of the first things I said, it ought to be a company priority because customer lifetime value is what we're really targeting as a SaaS organization. Not instrumenting each stage of the customer journey. We just talked about that a little bit now. Like the idea of building out a life cycle is so that you have some indicators of things that might be going wrong or a little bit off before you get a negative outcome. And then the last that I'll mention that I'm pretty sure we talked about a little bit as well is waiting too long to build the function. Basically, waiting until you have a problem to try to address it. If you bring on a post-sales leader when you already have a huge retention issue, first of all, you're making their job a lot harder because that means you have ingrained processes and cultural expectations that need to be changed. And cultural development is a long-term play. And second, you've already missed out on a ton of value. You may have damaged your reputation with some of these organizations. You have already lost out on potential expansion revenue. And if you want these clients back, you're going to have to invest as if they're a net new client again. So you're spending twice to get this client. So I'll say again, you want to hire your first post-sales leader before it's comfortable to do so.
Have you seen any sort of examples of where expansion has actually hurt retention? Maybe if it was done poorly or if it was rushed, perhaps.
Yeah, I got caught up a little bit in my own head about definitions because when I think about expansion, it's like selling additional seats of a product that already exists. But other people can think about expansion as selling a brand new product into a client. So we'll take that definition. In that case, absolutely. Especially, well, actually, the only time I've seen it be a problem is when the cross-sell or presenting a new product expansion is owned by a different person than the one that owns the renewal. And specifically what I see is the person doing the expansion pushing really hard without any respect or knowledge about the existing relationship. Or a client has a set budget and they're basically competing with their colleague that owns the renewal for that set budget. And they're doing it in an unhealthy way because it gives them their, their commission.
Yeah.
How do you approach developing leaders who might eventually or could eventually replace you?
Yeah, this really one of my favorite topics to think through. I mentioned I'm an executive coach as well, and it's because leadership development is my favorite thing. It's been my favorite part of the leadership job, and it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of releasing of attachment of your own ego and your own expectations of both what a team member will develop into, and again, even the way you ask the question, like you're developing to them to replace you eventually. You can't be attached to your own role even. So that's all to say that I absolutely love this topic. But the way that I approach the development from a principles level is clarity, to bring that word up again, being really clear on what's expected in their current role. And then if they deliver on those expectations, what are some of the paths that are open to them? But at that same time, giving them agency in their development, meaning asking them, what is it that you're really attached to? Where do you want to take your career? And listening. Because if you as a leader are pushing a developmental path on someone, you're never going to get as good of results as if they're choosing the developmental path, right? When it's coming from something that they truly want and desire, you're almost certainly going to get better outcomes than if you're dictating what they should be doing. And then the next piece is giving them opportunities to stretch and learn that are related to the way that they want to develop and where they see their career going. Which means, again, as a leader, you have to be okay with them making mistakes and perhaps even failing at these opportunities to stretch and learn. Which brings me to the next piece and the last piece that I'll say, which is trust. And we can call it psychological safety again as well. But your team member needs to trust that if they go to stretch and take risks or try something new, that you're not going to immediately take that as a sign that they're not good enough or pass them over for future promotions or punish them for making a mistake. And you can really only build that trust through consistent effort and consistent actions over time.
Yeah, I can see how your executive coaching experience must come in handy there. What's the best advice about leadership, or I guess business in general, that you've received during your career?
Yeah, it's I worked with a mentor / coach. I can't say mentor because we definitely paid him a lot of money to have these meetings, so probably more of a coach. But he was a sales leader at a massive organization. I won't say the name of the organization, but he was there to scale them from 8 figures of revenue to 9 and then 10 figures of revenue. And he communicated that he used the same process from the start to the very finish. And the idea behind it is that you can't hold other people accountable. What you can do is create the environment for them to hold themselves accountable. And you've already heard a lot of that in how I speak about leadership and how I think about building teams. It's that question of how do you create an environment where someone holds themselves accountable? Like, one, they have to be very clear on what's expected of them and what success looks like. 2, they have to be able to measure in real time if they're successful or not. And number 3, you put the onus on them to communicate whether they're successful, what's working and what's not working, and what they're going to do about it when it's not working. And then you are in the seat to guide and provide clarity and direction and stop them from making huge irreversible mistakes. But yeah, that one piece of advice, he was specifically talking about sales teams that he ran, but I've applied that same principle to support, implementation, solutions engineering, and then to total company operations as chief of staff to the CEO as well. And it has yet to fail me.
Awesome. Yeah, that's so cool. How much does AI play as a role in what you're doing now? Are you finding that there's a lot of stuff you can use with your fractional customer success leadership work, or not so much?
Absolutely. There's a ton of stuff that you can use. Depending on the level of investment you want, like at a small level, just using it to write messaging, like going a little bit higher, like connecting different systems so that the messaging sends automatically. Like you can have a way cheaper alternative to some of the existing customer success platforms that are out there. all the way to I advise one company that has from the start built their customer success process through an agent. So they're building an agent to handle about 90% of what a CSM might do.
Wow.
So yeah, the opportunities are endless if you are willing to do the work. The challenge is hardly any organization, and I'm not making this up. There was a study that was released in August of last year, I believe, that showed somewhere on the order of 92% of companies fail to realize the efficiency gains that they expect from AI.
Wow.
Um, and the reason for that is that uh, a company thinks they can just drop an AI tool into an unchanged system or process and an unchanged culture, or just kind of bolt it on to pre-existing processes, and it's going to change everything. Uh, when in reality, what you end up with is like 2 or 3 people do something that's pretty cool, and the rest of the culture remains unchanged. And so it is a far bigger commitment than people give it credit for. And I think brand new companies have a huge advantage in this space because they can build AI into their organizational DNA, whereas more established companies are struggling because I mentioned this earlier. They need to engage in a practice of cultural development and cultural shift, which means changing roles and expectations, um, changing and letting go of processes. And uh, when you're thinking about large scale cultural development, you're thinking about things on the order of years, not weeks or months. And that's a big commitment.
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot more. I think small companies grow really quickly because of AI in ways that bigger companies they just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be possible or practical for them. Um, for the companies that you typically work with, what would you recommend to them? What do you recommend to them if they're struggling to prioritize and hit different goals that they have in the company as they're scaling and as their resources are, of course, limited?
Yeah, great question. I'll tease it apart a bit because there's the prioritizing piece, which is super important. But then you also said struggling to hit, which I'll put into the execution category, which are like very tightly related, but not the exact same process. So, on the prioritization piece, what I see most often is an actual, real strong desire to get focused on one thing, like one big thing that will change the company's trajectory. But then a lot of difficulty in saying no when things that aren't related to that one big thing come up. And what you end up with is that you're communicating that one thing is the priority broadly, but then in your day-to-day decisions, you're kind of saying everything is important. And that leads to wasted effort and a lot of confusion throughout the organization. And so the first recommendation that I give there, and I've run a number of these meetings as well, is you get all of the relevant stakeholders into a room, and your task for however long it takes to typically run these for 1 to 2, 4 to 6 hour sessions, uh, is figure out what is the one thing that you want to accomplish this year that will change the company's trajectory. Right? Um, and that one thing needs to be measurable as well. And so let's say you choose net retention for your target. Right? I see did you want to say something there?
No,
No?
no, no.
Okay, cool. Uh, well, I'll continue then. So let's say it's improving net retention. Um, where priority and execution are kind of braided together, or when you say like, all right, it's net retention, we've gone through this meeting, we know this is the number that we want to drive, you immediately shift into how are each of these stakeholders contributing to that goal in a measurable way. And then in the same way that you might coach an individual on their own developmental path, or the same way you might hold an accountability meeting with them, these stakeholders are in charge of creating the how. Like, how are we going to build this target? Right. And that's important to do, excuse me, in the same meeting. You don't want to say this is the priority, then go off and get distracted by a bunch of stuff. To bring it into reality, it's like, all right, now what are we going to do about it, and who's in charge of it? And that's kind of the core of execution. And then you layer on the other things that I talked about of psychological safety, cascading those goals and clarity all the way down to individual team members. And then having at every single level, having the direct report be in charge of the how and in reporting on progress.
Awesome. Gianna, any closing comments or questions?
I was going to ask, if a founder is listening and they think that maybe that their client churn is perhaps manageable but slightly worrying, what's the one thing that you would advise them to look at first?
If they think it's okay, but they're kind of feeling a little bit shaky.
Yeah, it's getting to the point where maybe it could be worrying.
Like realistically speaking, I would say, like, what is it that's making you shaky about this? If you can't 100% say we have this on lock and I don't need to worry about this, it's not keeping me up at night. What is it that's keeping you up at night? Is it that you lack visibility into the complete customer lifecycle? Do you not trust that your team is managing the conversations well? Do you not trust that you're actually delivering on the value that you promised? Do you think you're closing bad deals? Get clear on what's keeping you up at night and then do some investigation.
And if anyone is listening and wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can shoot me a direct email, terence@proactivity.io. You can visit my website, which is also proactivity.io, or send me a DM on LinkedIn at Terence Davy.
Awesome. Well, Terence, thanks so much for coming on. A lot of fantastic value for any founders or CEOs listening. And for the audience, thanks for tuning in, and see you on the next one.